Okay. Hello, I'm Tom Kramer. I'm running to get higher pay for regular people. When I was a kid, my father was a union janitor, was low paid, and worked 60 hours plus side jobs. Rarely saw him. When the Democrats came into power with the election of JFK, unions became strong and my father got a 40-hour work week with a living wage. I got to see my father, we got a house, a car, and I got to go away to college. We became part of the middle class. Along with higher pay comes time to spend with family and with your community. You become part of society and you have respect and dignity. The money and time brings you more than material rewards. Now we have the highest rate of economic inequality since 1910, and it's getting worse. We must increase the pay for regular people, stop the progression of economic inequality, and take support away from Donald Trump and the Republicans. In addition, I will lead the change to end global warming, end the attack on women's rights, LGBTQ rights, minority rights, voting rights, and provide Medicare for all, and raise Social Security. Thank you. Bye.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Shannon Hader, and in a snapshot, I guess I'm a problem solver of the results that people provide in those dire circumstances. And I think we're pretty darn dire circumstances in the country right now. I am from Auburn, born and raised in the area. Graduated from Auburn High School. My dad worked for Boeing for 30 years. My mom taught at community centers, and I graduated from Auburn High School and was the first person in my family to go to a 4-year college, and I went to Stanford. Professionally, I ended up becoming a doctor. I'm a pediatrician and internist and infectious disease doc, and I've done mostly public health. My last job was working for Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, running a huge program, our division of global HIV and TB. And that matters because that was all about managing problems and peoples and solutions. Big budgets like $2.4 billion a year, which is like 25 to 30 city of Ellensburg budgets each year. And that matters because when you want to manage the way forward, you want to do it with surgical precision and not with a hatchet. When you want to infuse new resources, you want to do it in a concentrated manner that has an impact and not just as a bucket. So I want to deliver for the people of the earth.
Bruce, are we allowed to stand, or can we?
Oh, yes, you can. I think that only, I'm not clear how our...
We're live streaming, it might be an issue.
Okay, so no on the standing, all right. Well, it's a genuine honor to be here. It's an honor because I come from the kind of family where you don't get an opportunity to run for Congress. My parents are both union members, working class people, public school teachers who worked 2 or 3 jobs when I was growing up. And, you know, whatever I do later in my life, that's always going to be where I came from. I'm a working class Democrat. And, you know, all that said, you know, there's some practical reasons why I may be the strongest candidate for this particular race at this time. A supermajority of this district is saying the most compelling reason that they'll vote for the next representative is someone who's got credibility in creating jobs for the middle class and an economy for the middle class, which is why Dino's putting all his money and communicating about that. They've got the same polls I do, but the difference is there's only one of us who's created jobs, who's actually built middle class jobs for middle class families. And that could be the key to finally winning the swing district.
Thanks so much for being here. My name is Jason. 25 years ago, I was born and raised here in Ellensburg. And growing up in Eastern Washington, I learned just how hard it is for the middle class to get ahead. Many of you in this room know my dad as a police chief. But what you probably don't know is that when I was born, my dad would come home at night, take his uniform off, put on a Domino's Pizza t-shirt, and deliver pizzas in order to make ends meet. You know, I got a strong public school education at Damon Elementary School and then Ellensburg High School, and took that education to the University of Washington. My first job was on a hayfield in the Kittitas Valley, and that's how I paid for school at UW, and then went on to law school in Chicago and back to King County to serve as a criminal prosecutor. I went to work every single day focused on protecting the community. Now as a lawyer, I've represented thousands of Washington workers who've been taken advantage of by powerful interests that don't play by the rules. And that's why I'm running for Congress. I'm running for Congress to be a voice for the middle class, to stand up for working families, and take on a DC that is absolutely broken. So I look forward to this opportunity to talk with you about the issues. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kim Schreier. For those of you who have not had the opportunity to meet me, I'm a pediatrician in Issaquah. I have been working there taking care of families, children in this district for the past 16 and a half years, and make no mistake, I love my job. I never thought I would do anything else. And then the 2016 election happened, and that was a huge wake-up call for me, for my family, and for my patients. I had deep concerns about our society and my patients and their families under this administration. In fact, such deep concerns that I went with 3 other doctors and we met with Reichert's office when that first AHCA bill came out. Explained all the ways this would be bad for my patients in this district, and 2 days later he voted yes anyway. And that is not acceptable. We need a representative who will fight for our best interests. And that's why I'm in this. I'm going to fight for the best interests of my families that I take care of, and for families all over this district. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll start with the questions. Are there people still circulating to collect?
Any
So,
call for questions?
yeah, so if you do have questions, we're asking that you not, of course, jump up and scream them out, but we have cards, pens, and if we can get them, we'll pass them up and try to get to those as we're going through the evening. So let's just kick it off with our first question. We'll start with Tom, and again, we'll just rotate through as we go through. The other thing I would just caution folks, I mean, appreciate that we applauded because they were their opening statements and it's what you have to do. But we're going to, again, ask you to hold your applause as we're going through the questions, because we really do. We want to break at 8 o'clock, give the opportunity for people to do to meet people individually. So let's just be a little sensitive to that. So here's our first one. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, nearly 20% of Kittitas County residents live in poverty, compared to 9% of King County residents. If elected, what would you do to bring economic improvement to the rural communities in your district?
Well, first of all, my program is to raise pay for regular people and raise Social Security and retirement benefits. The Federal Reserve and the federal government for the last 37 years since Ronald Reagan has operated under trickle-down economics. Classical economics, FDR, JFK, Lyndon Johnson built the middle class in this country. We invested in it, and we directed money from that Federal Reserve and the federal government towards that middle class. Now, one thing that Ellensburg has is Central Washington University. It is known across the country for its biotech, producing biotech researchers and analysts. And we can invest in that some more in order to produce businesses out there that are involved in biotech, state-of-the-art in this area. We also need to change the funding of agriculture in this area. Now, 90% of the money goes to the top big corporations. It needs to be directed at family farms and small businesses in the area, and not towards big corporations, which don't need the subsidies anymore.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so, and I'll be more than glad to repeat the question. I can change it a little if you think it'd make it easier, but.
I got it.
Okay.
So I think 3 things, short-term, medium-term, and long-term, I'd like to see and help to do to improve the economic opportunities here. Short-term, this tax plan that we just passed is catastrophic. We need to flip the house so that we can all get in there and reverse some of the changes to restore and expand the kind of tax credits that we know help our lower income and working class families. Second, medium term, this is all about growth and economic growth with industry, and I totally agree that having a university here in Ellensburg helps that a lot. So what are the new biotech, agritech, green energy jobs that this can be a center for expanding? And I think long-term, we don't have a long-term future unless we're investing in education. High-quality public education, multiple training options so that people and kids can really pursue their passion from the start And also, older workers can get retrained for maybe what their next job is going to be. So short-term, medium-term, long-term, we've got to look across the continuum, and that was what I would go to fight for.
Thank you. He's breaking the rules. You get 3 shots here. This is, there's the CD jacks, just so you know.
I know I look on the younger side, but I've actually worked on legislation on this very topic. And the question is about how are we going to do things in rural areas, just not for the country as a whole. I worked on the Washington Jobs Act of 2014 because I'm a huge proponent of equity crowdfunding. Really quickly, the middle class hasn't gotten a raise since the 1980s. All of the wealth aggregates to the top. It goes first to the cities, then to the millionaires, then to the 1%. So we need ways for communities to be able to invest in themselves. Equity crowdfunding enables that to happen because if someone wants to, start a new bar or a new restaurant or create a new job or buy equipment for their farm, the other people in the community can be that bank, and then they benefit from the wealth that's created. So you keep the wealth in the community, you keep the jobs in the community, and if we want a system of government that's going to build rural areas, we can't just attack, the federal legislation, which I think we should do. We need to solve that problem too. Thank you.
Income inequality is, without a doubt, the greatest threat to our democracy. 77% of the wealth in this country is owned by the top 10%. And the reality is we need to start focusing on policies that build prosperity in America from the middle out. There are 3 things that we should do immediately in Congress in order to address it. The first is to invest in infrastructure. Infrastructure investment means roads and bridges, it means broadband technology, and it means renewable energy technologies, which are jobs that will be built right here at home in the 8th District. The second thing we need to do is address the minimum wage. The minimum wage is completely out of date with growth. It has forced wealth at the top of our income bracket, and that's a problem. The third thing we need to do is refocus on small businesses in America because 75% of the jobs in this country, 75% of the jobs in the 8th District come from small businesses. We've restricted small businesses' ability to grow because they can't borrow money. And the reality is community banks and credit unions should be able to bet on a small business like they used to. And so we need to focus on allowing lending to small businesses so that they can grow, take that next risk, and build in rural communities like Ellensburg. Thank you.
Well, the eastern part of our district, Kittitas County, is incredibly powerful economically for this district. Timothy Hay alone accounts for $50 million of exports. And so if you're really going to help the eastern part of this district, you really need to invest in agriculture. One way to do that is to make sure that from a government standpoint, we invest in Washington State University research and we make sure that farmers here have access to the latest research and development. Another one is that the Farm Bill is coming up, and we need to make sure that farmers have subsidies and some cushion so that when there's a bad year or a natural disaster, their economic prospects do not go down the drain. And third, a lot of that Timothy hay is getting exported, and so having a good infrastructure plan allows this part of the district to get their agricultural products to market, and it also will bring jobs to this area. So infrastructure and transportation of goods through agriculture.
Thank you.
Okay, you ready, Shannon? Okay, what will you do to ensure women's reproductive health care access and the protection of Planned Parenthood?
I might not even need a minute for this one. So let me just make it very clear and put it out there. I am pro-choice, pro-women's health, and I believe that that is a fundamental both right and system of healthcare that we need to deliver on. I have spent a large amount of my health career, both spanning clinical provision and public health, making sure that services are available and high quality for women. That is both having the services available and affordable, but frankly, it's also saying, are they accessible? Is it easy for women to use them, to get their the things that they need to ensure that their health is great? We need to reverse some of the decisions that have been made. We need to make sure that we go back to moving forward with healthcare so that 100% of people have affordable, accessible, high-quality healthcare. And we need to ensure that there's a future for our women and families. And yeah, all points on deck.
Okay, that was Shannon Hayter, for those of you who can't see the sign. Braden Olson, we're next.
I think we're gonna all echo each other quite a bit. Absolutely pro-choice, absolutely agree. Just meeting with Planned Parenthood a couple days ago, and one of the things that I don't think we realize is that 97% of the money that we give to Planned Parenthood is for the protection of disease, the treatment of disease, prevention of disease. The fact that we can't get around something that provides a function very much like the CDC in protecting our country is something that voters need to understand. This isn't a partisan issue, and when we take it into a partisan place, we lose voters that would otherwise be supporting these rights. So I think, part of our role as representatives is to communicate in a way that speaks to all of our constituents. And that is one of the ways that I would be talking about that issue to get more people on board with us. And the other thing I would echo in my last couple seconds is, yes, it has to be affordable and accessible. And we can't keep making the trade between accessible but higher premiums or affordable but not everyone gets it.
Jason Ritterizer.
There's no question that women's reproductive health care rights have been under attack in the Trump administration more so than ever in my lifetime. And what we need is somebody who can go into a room in Congress and actually stand up for women's health care rights, who can be a voice and a fighter against the Trump administration who has consistently put women's health care rights in its crosshairs. To me, it's particularly important coming from Ellensburg because 36% of the patient population in this county is served by Medicaid and served by the Planned Parenthood that's right down in the center of town here. The reality is, if we consistently allow attacks on women's health care rights, it reduces payments under Medicaid, and that hurts rural medicine in America, in particular in Ellensburg. For me, I have a history of standing up for women's rights through my work as an employment lawyer. I've taken on big corporations who don't play by the rules. I brought the very first case to protect nursing mothers in the workplace and represented a woman who was fired for being pregnant out of wedlock. And standing up for in those type of situations is absolutely essential for the next representative for this district. Thank you.
Kimberly Schreier.
Well, the only people who should be making decisions about women's health and women's fertility planning are women and their doctors. Now, regarding Planned Parenthood, I was out protesting Bork in 1987. I have been rallying for Planned Parenthood for decades, and that will not stop in Congress. I intend to be a champion for Planned Parenthood because, as everybody here has just pointed out, Planned Parenthood is an incredibly important provider of all sorts of medical care, ranging from contraception to immunizations to cancer screening, and they do it better than other federal health clinics. Planned Parenthood is indispensable. Thank you.
Tom Kramer.
Okay, I've been a long time advocate for women's rights and women's rights to choose. My wife's been a leader in the field, a leader at Now, a leader at NARO, Planned Parenthood, etc. Now, one of the biggest things that has happened in our country, 60% of women do not have accessibility to abortion because of the Hyde Amendment. One of the first things I would do is to produce legislation to get rid of the Hyde Amendment. Right now, the right anti-choice people are getting funded by religious initiatives through the federal government. We need to stop that, start funding organizations like Planned Parenthood and get rid of the Hyde Amendment, and I've worked hard to get that done. Thank you.
Short question, but it's sort of loaded. Sorry. We'll go to Braden. This is Braden Olson. What is your position on gun control?
Okay, so I am, of course, for common sense gun reform. I don't think it's actually that quick or easy of a question. I think that a lot of times we try to tackle this purely as a legislative issue. And the problem is that, the law-abiding citizens are not typically the issue. So one of the things I've talked about in some of these other venues is it would help to send someone who understands that things are changing You don't just buy guns at gun stores. You can buy them on the dark net. And you can do that regardless of what legislation we pass. So I completely believe in pushing gun reform. I completely believe in that. But we also need to live in a reality where it's not going to be just legislative choices. Thank you.
Jason, you're right.
This is a deep personal issue to me. I grew up in a law enforcement family. I grew up with guns in the house. I grew up a hunter. And I've also worked as a criminal prosecutor on gun violence issues in South King County. Now look, I believe in the Second Amendment. I also know that we have a gun violence problem in America that we need to address. And in Congress, we're not doing anything. The things that we can do to address it are first, fix our background check problem. The NICS process doesn't work. I've seen it not work as a criminal prosecutor. I've been in situations where I've seen convictions from other states not show up on those reports. And we need to amend that process so that it actually works. The second thing we need to do is pass some common sense gun reforms on issues like domestic violence abusers. If you are convicted of domestic violence, you don't get a gun. If you're on the no-fly list because you're being deemed to be a terrorist in America, you don't get a gun. And we need to take those steps immediately because this problem can't wait. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Next up is Kimberly Schreier.
Of course, people have a right to own guns. I just want them owned responsibly and safely, like I think we all do. As a pediatrician, I have a little bit different perspective because I take care of a lot of, unfortunately, depressed teenagers. And I know, and we just saw tragically yesterday, that the difference between a contemplated suicide in a teenage boy and a completed one is often whether there is a gun in a house not stored safely. So here's what I would like to see. Responsible gun ownership, thorough background checks. Guns should never be in the hands of children. They should not be in the hands of those with severe mental illness. They should not be in the hands of anybody with a history of domestic violence. They should be stored properly. Finally, there is no place for military-style weapons in civilian hands. And with regard to recent reciprocity laws, I strongly oppose them because they undermine our state's background check system. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Tom Kramer.
Yes, I had to mention, I had a good friend that was a gun collector. He owned 50 to 100 weapons. The last time I saw him, I visited Chicago. He had loaded weapons on a counter. He was supposedly cleaning them, and then he's telling me how depressed he was with his life. I was kind of, I literally excused myself, called the police to do a check on him, because we do not need to have, he had automatic weapons out there. People like him at that point do not need to have automatic weapons. I respect the Second Amendment. I know hunters, people want it for personal safety. My life has been threatened. People said, I've got 2 volunteer bodyguards right now, and I'm ordering a bulletproof vest because I'm a liberal out there. Everybody knows it, and I got a target on my back. Okay, so I'm getting death threats. So thank you, but stronger gun control, yes.
Thank you. Next up is Shannon Hayter.
So I support the Second Amendment. My niece and her husband own an outfitting hunting fishing guide service. My nephew-in-law is a hunter and fisher guide, and I know that we have a lot of responsible gun owners in Washington, and that's important. I also support common sense gun laws, which I think have been covered by this panel, but I look at what we need to do next as a public health problem, a comprehensive public health problem that doesn't only address murder and assaults and that kind of violence, but also recognizes accidents and also recognizes suicides. 2 to 1 usually suicides, number of deaths by gun, compared to assaults or murders. And that's profound. One of the things getting in the way of our addressing this as a public health issue is we don't know what works. CDC has been effectively banned since the early 90s from doing gun violence research to try to find out what solutions are actually going to help us have fewer deaths and fewer injuries. So I would immediately both authorize and fund CDC to get the answers we need to decide what to do.
Okay. Housing is expensive all over the 8th Congressional District. 60% of Ellensburg residents are housing burdened. What would you do in Congress to ease the housing affordability crunch? Jason Ritterizer, we'll start.
I think affordable housing is a top 5 issue in America today. I actually serve on the State Advisory Council on Homelessness, and one of the issues that we address in that capacity is the affordable housing crisis in America. And I think it's an issue that is not talked about enough, because today families are spending nearly half of their income, which is a significant increase over the last 20 years, just to pay their rent. And more families are renting than own homes in America for the first time. The reality is the affordable housing issue is not just an issue for those who are homeless or on the edge of homelessness. It's an issue of livability. And we're seeing housing prices spike everywhere in Washington state. The first thing that we could do is we could pass what's called the low-income housing tax credit. It's a bill that is pushed by Senator Cantwell that would relieve pressure on the housing market, that would incentivize private industry to build affordable housing units. Obviously, Mr. Tabb had a big win on affordable housing in this community, and those are the type of ideas we need to champion.
Thanks. Kimberly?
One of the reasons that housing has gotten so expensive is because of big corporations that have come in, particularly in the Seattle area, and people can then no longer afford to live in the city and move to the suburbs, and from the suburbs further out, and it really creates a whole wave effect. I think part of the responsibility of that really should be borne on the very wealthy corporations who brought those fantastic jobs to the area, and they create a wealth for the area, but they also create this problem, and it is part of social responsibility. Another way to address this, though, is to really have a livable minimum wage. Because a person working a 40-hour week at a minimum wage job should not have to live in poverty or in their parents' basement. And so with those two ways, one, asking the corporations to do their fair share, and the other with raising wages, I think we can help with affordable housing. Thank you.
Tom Kramer.
I've been going door to door across the district, and that was the number one concern is higher wages. And I think wages should be 45% higher. Right now, the Federal Reserve is giving away $3.5 trillion to the top 1%. They're giving it through Wall Street, $6 billion a day away. They have that in reserves. They want to get rid of it. They should give back to the middle class, number one. Number two, they said back in the middle of December they're going to raise interest rates. It doesn't lower the cost of housing. That lowers wages and raises the cost of housing. We have this trickle-down economic theory that's driving housing. Units of housing sold today are 20% lower than they were a year ago. However, the prices have gone up. The market is about the same. The average home selling in this district is about $1 million now. Most people can't afford $1 million house. Their wages need to be higher, the interest rates need to be lower, lower the cost, lower the interest rates, more people can afford homes. Thank you.
Shannon Hader.
Yeah, so housing insecurity, of course, affects a lot more than just your house. It affects our health, it affects our job opportunities, it affects our education and our children's success. So it's incredibly a critical fabric to multiple aspects of our lives. 3 things, I guess. Number one, at this very difficult time where the disparities are growing, HUD's budget for emergency housing has been cut, I think, by 2/3. So let us restore HUD's budget and enhance the programs that give the flexibility for local communities to invest in the solutions that are going to reduce homelessness and increase stability in their own community. Second, echoing the panel, wages, wages, wages. We've got to make sure that we have jobs and job opportunities for families and people that are going to allow them to have stability in their housing and be able to afford some of these rents or prices to get houses. And I think third, definitely including incentives that encourage affordable housing along with construction. So how do we incentivize private corporations to do a bit of their work when they're growing our communities?
Braden Olson.
Well, this is a perfect opportunity for me to set the record straight on a small thing that's been bugging me. This says Seattle, but I've been in East King County for the last decade. I live in Issaquah now. So when we talk about these issues, a lot of people will say, oh, it's just Seattle, we don't have to worry about it. But I know very well that that's not the case. And I'm gonna share a statistic that probably most everyone in this room will find shocking, which is that China has double the rate of millennial home ownership that we do. And we have the lowest rate of home ownership that we've seen in recorded history in this country. So, this is the key factor for building wealth in the middle class. It has been proven time and again. Building equity in your home is how we do it. So we are so far behind. But the problem with just doing tax incentives, and I've worked on bills around this topic, is that they just ignore them because they can make more money because the value goes up next year. So you give them a tax incentive, but I can rent it for more. So I ignore it. It's supply and demand. We have to increase building. We have to incentivize builders. And one of the other huge things is we have a huge number of non-resident homeowners. They're just renting out or leaving their properties vacant. We cannot allow that. I've worked on some legislation on this topic too. But that's where we need to go. Supply and demand, we can't fix it without fixing the way the economy is working.
Thank you. Just an announcement as we're going through this. This is the age in which we live. Rob just indicated that there's so many people using the Wi-Fi that's available here that we're not streaming cleanly. So if you could be just sensitive to how you're using your phones, not tie into the Wi-Fi that's available through How Homes. It will allow us to cleanly live stream through our Facebook connection. So thank you. So I think we're at okay. So that's so this would be Kimberly Schreier. This is probably a good one for you to start with. Previously, a couple of the folks up on the panel talked about affordability and accessibility for healthcare. We talk about the individual insurance premiums. We realize and recognize they're going up, but also healthcare itself, the costs continue to increase. Universal coverage is one way to control those costs, but what would you do to control the overall cost spiral? In 1 minute.
No problem. Well, in our healthcare non-system, the fact of the matter is healthcare just costs too much in this country. We spend $9,000 per person in this country on healthcare and have poorer outcomes compared to the next highest, which is about $5,000 per person. So, first of all, universal healthcare is fantastic, but that does not define any particular system, and I have the same goals of everybody up here. I want affordable, accessible care for everybody in this country. In one day, I had 3 moms come into my clinic, and all 3 of them cried because Regents was pulling out, their rates were going up, deductibles were going up, and they were going to spend something like $28,000 before insurance even started to help. So let's first stabilize the ACA and stop the skyrocketing of prices. Then let's give people the freedom to buy into Medicare before they're 65. I do believe we should have some government oversight as to costs, simply because a knee replacement in one part of this country should not be vastly different from a knee replacement elsewhere. And last, let's negotiate drug prices. Thank you.
Thank you. So that would bring us back to Tom Kramer.
Okay, I've got a note to begin with. I'm a health policy expert. I've had a fellowship in health policy and worked in the field. Number one, right now, Wall Street is running your healthcare system. What's happened is the private insurance companies last quarter produced a 30% average, 30% profit. Okay, so Wall Street is investing in it to cut down your usage of healthcare. Your doctor has to get permission before and a code approval in order to give you that healthcare. Wall Street is pushing those prices. They're pushing Medicare reimbursements down for doctors. Now, of the private insurance companies, they have a 30% profit. Their administrative costs are 18%. Out of the healthcare dollar, they're getting 48 cents. They don't offer any medical care. They don't offer any health care. not like our doctors on the panel here. They're not doing anything but getting profits for Wall Street. We need to stop that, get Medicare for all in the country. The administrative costs only 3% versus 18% with no profits. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Shannon Hader.
Sure. Common theme, 100% accessible, affordable, high-quality health care, period. How do we get there from where we're at right now? Number one, lower drug costs. We have a huge bargaining power with the volume of Medicare. We're not using it. We can lower drug costs, and we should do it right away. Second, we need to lower premiums for healthy young people. ACA was a good start, but it didn't work out as well as possible. The premiums are too high. We can do that nearly immediately by lowering the age for Medicare buy-in, so that we get some of our older and highest risk folks into the Medicare pool, and that will make it more sustainable for our young people in the pools as well. And I think third is really addressing costs, and this is multifactorial. It's cost transparency so that both doctors and clients actually know what the charges are going to be, but it's also accelerating some of the innovative payment reforms that have been included in the ACA but haven't been rolled out to scale yet. And these are payments that incentivize health and health outcomes rather than just procedures and minutes. So we can do this. It's a complicated system, but we can continue to move forward.
Thank you. Braden?
I'm actually working on a book right now talking about systemic inequities. And we spend more, as Dr. Fryer was saying, than any other countries on healthcare. In fact, 25% of it goes to administration alone. And there are stories of, hospitals that have 900 beds, but 1,600, account agents chasing bills. And, Health Affairs, which is the number one research and journal institution that sits up bipartisan, tells us that for every dollar we spend in prevention, we'll save $2.70 in emergency rooms. But they also said the ACA is going to increase the premium to 6 to 10%. So why? On the left, we're concerned with access. On the right, we're concerned with affordability. Who's winning? No matter what side wins, the insurance companies. And we're going to have to send representatives who are willing to risk their jobs every day if we're going to go after companies with that much power. But I do believe that that is what the job of a representative is, to risk ours to make your life better.
Thank you. Jason Witterizer?
I don't think that healthcare is a human right in this country, and we ought to start treating it like that. I think there's 4 things we can do immediately to reduce the cost of healthcare in this country. The first thing we can do is we can raise the threshold for Medicaid eligibility. Because there's a whole threshold of folks who are not eligible for Medicaid, but can't afford to buy healthcare in this country. The second thing we can do is we can lower the age eligibility for Medicare from 65 to 55 years old. My dad's a perfect example. He could retire at 55 years old, but he can't because he can't afford health care. He's a law enforcement officer and would otherwise be eligible. The next thing we can do is we can make Medicare available as a buy-in option in private insurance markets where there's 1 or fewer insurers, which will create competition in the market. It'll also bring in healthy people and lower premiums immediately. And the last thing we can do, which has been reiterated on this stage, we can allow the government to negotiate drug prices with its power through Medicare. If we do that, because right now they're prohibited from doing it, if we allow the government to negotiate drug prices, it will drive down drug prices and save us money. Thank you.
If anybody has any questions they want to put on cards, put your hand up and we will run a card out to you. Okay. I'm going to cobble 2 questions together, so pardon my delivery. Opioid use and abuse in rural communities continues to grow, and yet we have no treatment in Kittitas County for any kind of drug treatment. What is your plan in Congress to reduce this public health risk and address the needs of rural communities on drug dependency? And see, Tom, you're first. Tom Kramer.
Well, opioid use is essentially a public health problem produced by mainly emphasized by the private sector. 70% addiction is not illegal drugs today, but is produced by the private sector prescribing as many drugs as possible. Person comes in the door and the physician and the patient pushes towards over prescribing opioids. Now, in the treatment Donald Trump set aside, we know what he set aside, I think it was $5 million nationwide, which was something like 5 cents per patient across the country. It was ridiculous plan. Republicans have been cutting into mental health and addiction treatment for the last 37 years since Ronald Reagan. We need to restore those funds. We need to use that money in the federal budget instead of subsidizing giant corporations to actually get treatment for people that need treatment, and they can be rehabbed and become productive, healthy, tax-paying members of society. Thank you.
Shannon Hayter.
Yeah, I spent a sabbatical year as a health policy fellow on the Hill, staffing Senator Ed Markey. And it was actually the year when Philip Seymour Hoffman died. And he was already interested in opioid response because Massachusetts had a problem. But when Philip Seymour Hoffman died, it blew the window open to have a galvanized response at a policy level that just wasn't there before. Somehow celebrity brought this to the front and allowed legislators to start to engage. So I actually worked in his office convincing him and a lot of different partners about what it would look like to have a more comprehensive bill and drafting some of that language. So we've made some progress, but not nearly enough. And I think Kittitas County is the best example of that. We need to have comprehensive treatment available, including medication-assisted therapy everywhere. We have ways to do that, but we have bureaucratic barriers right now that are keeping it from getting done. Physicians are limited to the number of patients they can put on medication-assisted therapy. Oftentimes, non-physician practitioners, even though they can prescribe opioids, they can't prescribe treatment. We can eliminate a lot of these barriers and use modern medicine, including modern providers, to be able to help support the members of Kittitas County.
Braden Wilson.
I think there's really two complex topics within this issue. One is, how do we get there? Like, why is this happening? And we are at the highest point of wealth inequality that we've had since the Great Depression. A lot of people use addiction and various forms of addiction as a form of escape. So the harder that people's lives are, the more this becomes an endemic. So we have to focus on income equality, but for the people who are already in this position and people who are suffering, addiction is addiction. Whatever drugs you're addicted to, I have friends who run centers in this field, and it is a lifelong process. We are not adequately funding the centers that provide treatment, and we can't. We are going to have to look at innovative ways of getting these people back into, as you're saying, the working population. And so we're going to need to make investments in the centers that are treating people, find innovative new methods to do it, which I have some recommendations on, and frankly, we've got to get to the root cause, which is people are struggling. That's why they're going to addiction.
Jason Riederizer.
Here's the problem. We have treated addiction like a criminal justice problem. And we have laid addiction at the feet of law enforcement and criminal prosecutors to deal with it. And the reality is we're not going to arrest our way out of an addiction problem. We need to finally start treating this like the public health crisis that it is. Part of why we pushed this on to law enforcement is because we defunded treating addiction problems. We need to start funding treating addiction problems because it is a public health crisis. In Congress, that's part of your job. Go out and find funding for your district that will actually make people's lives better. I will be focused in Congress to make sure that we shift the conversation from a criminal justice problem to a public health problem, and that we start treating addiction like the public health crisis that it is. Thank you.
Right on.
Kimberly
Schreier.
I agree, Jason. I absolutely think that we need to wrap our heads around this and think about the opioid epidemic, which I know is bad here, but it's bad in every community in this country. We need to treat it as a health problem and a chronic disease and address it in that way. And that means first we stem the tide by talking with doctors about how to not overprescribe. And then we treat this as a real, long-lasting chronic illnesses, which means it will take years to get people off of these medicines or illicit medicines. So treatment involves using long-acting opiates in order to reduce cravings and having counseling to go with that. Doctors in rural areas should be able to get that same training that we get anywhere else. It only takes 1 or 2 days. I would also note that in states where marijuana is legal, there is 25% fewer deaths from opiates. And so there may be something to look at there. And finally, yeah, recognizing that this is a public health problem and not a disorder of character.
Thank you. So we'll shift just a little bit. This one is, if you're in Kittitas County, Kittitas County has an incredible amount of public land, state land and federal. So the question is, how would you protect our public lands from drilling, mining, fracking, and or private development? And Shannon, I'm sorry, Shannon.
Yeah, I think this is a year where it is remarkable how much more at threat our public lands are than we even expected 6 months ago. And just a couple of weeks with the new presidential comments and orders on drilling surprised me. And I want to keep being surprised because I want to still keep being outraged and figuring out how we respond. Public lands are part of our collective wealth, and they're there for a reason. We have to legislatively do what we need to do to protect them, because the incentive, if we're not protecting them, to sell them off in one big swoop, to have a big investment of money for one elected official to deliver one measurable result to stay in office, is just too great of a temptation. We have to collectively mobilize voice, we have to have legislative responses that protect our lands, and we need to hold our elected officials accountable for making sure that that's true.
So then, thank you. That takes us to Braden Olson.
I agree. Legislation is one piece of the issue, but we can provide more funding, which we should, and I would agree with, for public lands and for taking care of them. But ultimately, the reason we're having wildfires here, the reason they're having wildfires in California, is what we're doing with the environment in general. And we can't just legislate our way out of what's happening on a larger scale. So for me, environmental policy is life or death. We have no idea what kinds of bills are going to come across our desk, but what I can say with absolute certainty is I have a zero tolerance line for things that are going to be short-sighted, because let's face it, I'm from this younger generation coming up. My dad was a lumberjack at one point, and I want to live in a world where we still have public parks and my kids have them. So any policy that comes across my desk that is not in line with the future of this environment, it's going to be a no. There are no short changes.
Thank you. Jason.
Ardent supporter of public lands. I mean, I grew up here and spent my childhood in the Kittitas Valley, and the reality is Washington State, in particular the 8th District, the land is made up of over 50% public lands. And when this is, by the way, the first administration since Teddy Roosevelt to ever use the Antiquities Act to roll back protections for public lands. It's fundamentally wrong, right? And when we're talking about public lands, what we're talking about is the environment. And we know here that public lands and our environment are absolutely intrinsically tied to our economy and to our public health. So when we are failing to protect our public lands, we're really failing to protect our economy and failing to protect our public health. Now, the debate is around this issue of whether or not states can care for their own public lands. So we need to, the argument on the other side is we need to turn it over to private industry because they can better protect our public lands. Well, that's just fundamentally not true. We all know that's not true. So what we actually need to do as a government is to fund care for these public lands to make sure we can treat them with the respect that they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you. Kim Schmidt.
Left, right, east of the mountains, west of the mountains, we all treasure our public lands. I fish the Yakima right down the street here. This administration has an obsession with pulling things out of the ground, whether it's coal or oil, and they are taking this country in exactly the wrong direction. By doing this, they are putting our planet's future at risk. They have a very short-sighted view, and they are basically being a government for the wealthy and for corporations, and not a government for the people. And the way to address that is that the people need to vote, and vote in representatives who will stand up to power and say that it is not all right to take away people's land and give it to corporations.
Thank you. Tom?
the, this administration, put Secretary of State from ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil Secretary of State was lying for 18 years. ExxonMobil budgeted for global warming in their budget for 18 years before he admitted that there was global warming, just in the last 2 years. Now, we have a situation where we're changing from carbon-based fuels to water, to hydropower, to solar, and to wind power, especially wind power in this area. There's a lot of wind power being exploited in this area, and it should be more so. And through the federal government, we can have subsidies to produce more wind power in this area. This would be a great boom for the community. Lastly, to protect those federal lands, we need to invest dollars and produce legislation, and I will do it if elected. Thank you.
Okay, another question I've cobbled together. King County economy and Kittitas County economies are vastly different. How would you, as our representative, balance that difference? And what commitments are you willing to make to the residents of Kittitas County that we could hold you accountable to accomplish?
Well, I talked a little bit about this at the Wenatchee Forum, actually. I do recognize those differences, and that's why I worked on equity crowdfunding, to keep money in communities and build wealth in communities. But I also recognize a huge opportunity in connecting the west side and the east side and not looking at them as disparate as we'd like to. We've got a huge base of technology on the west. We've got a massive understanding of wind farms and solar energy in the east. Why aren't we putting these two things together to build a stronger community? We could be one of the congressional districts that's leading the country in what we're doing with clean energy. We have all the resources here. So that commitment would be to take my skills, as an entrepreneur, and roll my sleeves up with the entrepreneurs in this district as someone they can access and build 5,000 jobs here, clean energy jobs. Let's be a leader in it.
That's a lot of jobs.
Yeah, that's right.
Jason,
Sorry, not just right here.
Oh, okay.
In the district, yeah, just so that you can hold me accountable for what I actually said.
I was going to go out and buy land as speculator right after this meeting. Jason Ruderizer.
I mean, there's no question that the economies of King County and the economies of Kittitas County and Chelan County are inherently different. I mean, this is my home, and I think it takes a representative who fundamentally understands both sides of the mountains. The reality is, my commitment would be to treat this part of the district just exactly the same as the other parts of the district. Set aside the fact that I was born and raised here and not give too much preference to this side of the state. But I think it comes from an understanding that King County's economy is built around manufacturing and big business and high tech. And in Eastern Washington, we're focused on agriculture and renewable energy technologies, which I was here before that existed. And so I think an understanding of the changing economy is going to be essential to making sure that the policies we're creating, the policies we're advocating for in Washington, D.C., reflect the diverse nature of this district. And that's what I'm committed to doing. Thank you.
Ken Schreier.
The economy in this district is quite variable, from manufacturing in the south, tech in King County, and then here agriculture is king. I already mentioned that some of the ways that we can help here with the economy is by investing in research and technology, working on immigration reform to make sure that our farmers have a reliable source of work, to keep jobs and to keep well-funded. And then there's this opportunity that we've alluded to about merging the interests of a clean energy economy with the wind and the sun that are here. Here's the thing though, we need to make sure, because I'm coming from King County, there's a long tradition of people on that side of the mountains telling people on this side of the mountains what they should be doing, and that is not fair. So as your Congresswoman, I will be listening and seeing how we can figure out a way to bring economic success here without disrupting your way of life.
Tom Kramer.
And now, again, we need to exploit Central Washington University here, has biotech, We can subsidize research in more wind power and development of more wind power in the area and more solar energy out here, and also support, support the family farmers out here and small business. And I think there are much more in common in the rest of King County than there are differences today. The world is getting smaller, high tech is moving, it's moving all over the world, not just in King County. And King County has the problem with Boeing. Boeing in this district has lost 40,000 jobs in the last 10 years in this district. And they're moving as fast as they can jobs out of the state to South Carolina, although we provide $8 billion worth of subsidies to keep those jobs here. So I'm going to stop that, and we're going to start subsidizing, producing jobs in here. That's our money in those federal government contracts. And our congressmen, our senators worked hard and long to get those contracts in this area. They need to remain here. Thank you.
Shannon Hader.
Yeah, I think we need to be looking at the diversity of our district as a strength and not as a weakness or liability. And, I think Northern King County from Southern King County, where I'm from, are also vastly different. So what does that mean? In my public health career, and the way I approach public health is a not one-size-fits-all model. So it's sort of precision public health. My career has been about looking at a specific community at a specific time, listening to what the community needs and wants, looking at the science and evidence and practices that might help, and crafting a solution that fits for results for that community at that time and into the future versus a generic solution. So I think in this kind of policy making, but also growth, we need precision policy and precision growth prescriptions. And we can do that because we can partner on solutions that make us all stronger. I don't want a weak Kittitas County. I know Kittitas County doesn't want a weak Auburn. How do we support each other to put together solutions and partner so we get the attention and investments we need to make it all work?
Thank you. So I think we're going to go to Jason. Is that? Yep. So this is Jason Reariser.
You're good?
I'm good.
Yeah, you do it.
People rarely say that to me. Community a few years ago lived through an ice raid that was incredibly traumatic, not just for the community, but for the people clearly that were in the crosshairs of that action. Others of us probably know people who are DACA, who are employed, who have been raised here, perhaps gone to school with them through our school systems. So I think we'd like to know not just your position, but what would be your approach to addressing immigration reform and the current deportation issue? Jason.
I look at the immigration issue as actually a unifying issue, because in our community here in Ellensburg, I think we understand how important immigrants are and how much of a fabric they are to our community. I think it's an issue we could actually cross the aisle on and find meaningful solutions in order to protect immigrants and bring dignity to the fact that we depend upon immigrant labor, and we depend upon them being productive members of our society, just like all of us came from immigrants at one point. And so the reality is, I can't think of a bigger injustice going on right now than the fact that America made a promise to 800,000 dreamers. And we are retracting that promise. And that's something I would be absolutely committed to standing up for and fighting for. Because the reality is those folks are just as American as I am, except in their papers. And the reality is we need somebody who's going to go to Washington, D.C. and stand up for them and fight every single day to make sure we bring dignity to an immigration system, while also ensuring we protect our borders and ensuring that there is a system that we're not separating families in America.
Thank you. Kim Schreier.
Well, we all came from somewhere. We are a nation of immigrants. And I am deeply troubled by what's going on with the anti-immigrant sentiment in this country right now. There are several ways that we can support our immigrant community. One is to have really good bipartisan immigration reform, and there was a bill in 2013 that was a pretty good bill. and that created a path for citizenship, and that is absolutely critical. It is critical to have not just a path to citizenship, but a path that does not break up families and that does not require you to leave the country and get in line. Second, we do need a clean and permanent DACA bill. As Jason said, the 800,000 young people's lives are hanging in the balance because our president wants a wall. We need a clean DACA bill. And third, we need to support agencies that are already here supporting our immigrants, like the North Pacific Immigrants' Rights Project and East Side Legal Assistance, and we can make sure they get adequately funded from Congress.
Thank you. We're just concrete.
Okay, my position is, we need a path for citizenship for everybody that is in this country. Ronald Reagan gave amnesty to 6 million people. 6 million people. He's the Republican idol out there they always talk about. Now, they sat at that table last week with Donald Trump saying, oh, I don't like this chain migration. His wife's family came here on chain migration. She came from a poor country. What does he want to do? Prohibit people from, like her and her family, from coming here in this country. 60% of the people at that table came here because of chain migration at one time or another. Now, we, the farmers, need cheap labor. What are we trying to secure the border from? People coming here to do our dishes, to cut our grass, to pick our crops. We don't need much more border security than we have. Our drug problem is coming not across the border now, but from ourselves and our laissez-faire attitude and our lack of mental health treatment in this country. Thank you.
Thank you. Shannon.
Yeah, so I mean, just off the top, which a lot of us have said, clean DACA bill, no wall, no travel ban, and let's make sure we're creating opportunities, not letting in. I think many of us in this room know our own immigrant history. I'm 5th generation Auburn because my mom's family landed in the Auburn-Kent-Tukwila Valley. I know my father's Ellis Island story of our Italian and Polish roots, and the fact that we didn't find out I was Italian until I was 12 because they were the new kids on the block, and it was just too tough. They all became Polish. But so yeah, and if you saw my dad, he was really Italian. So but this is a broader problem than immigration as well, and we've talked about on this panel the value of immigrants to our fabric. But this is part of a Trump administration tendency towards isolationism, somehow thinking that we are better isolated from the rest of the world than we are as part of the rest of the world. And in fact, my entire career has been about global is local. By inviting in new ideas, new processes, we are stronger, safer, and smarter here at home, and we will grow with a lot more strength than if we try to just, corner ourselves off from the rest of the world.
Great, thank you. Brady Nelson.
I agree with some of Jason's comments. It's not only the morally right thing to do, it's the economically right thing to do for this district. But I want to take a step further. We talk about immigrants as laborers. Immigrants are our innovators. They're the people who start our businesses. They file more patents on average, right? This is not just the day laborers, all right? This is a much larger part of our fabric. And more than 80% of this upcoming generation is pro-immigration. So we're making these short-sighted decisions for these young people when the next generation coming up is completely against these decisions, left and right. So I'm going to say it again, the real issue here is the inequity in the middle class. A lot of the people who are angry and voted Trump in and said, I want to build a wall, are people who are worried about not having their jobs. That is their real motivation. So I would take every dollar that the administration wants to spend on the wall and put it into small rural businesses. Let's win those voters back. Thank you.
Okay. Another twofer. In Kittitas County, we have wind power, we have solar power, the sun shines over here, just saying. The problem that we have is sometimes our windows go offline because the grid can't absorb all the power that we're producing. And yet we're being pressured to produce more power. So what would you do if you were a representative for Congress to address the infrastructure issues that are pervasive throughout the country, and especially in this county? Let's see who's first. Kim, I think you are. Kim Fryer.
I love that question.
Oh, good.
And thank you for your wind and your sun and your renewable energy. Thank you. One of the tricks to renewable energy sources is that they're not continuous. You can burn coal 24/7. You can't do that with wind and with sun. And so we definitely need modernization of our electrical grid, which is a huge infrastructure project and sounds like jobs to me. And also, by the way, sounds like not necessarily college needing jobs to me. These are technical jobs that are good paying. And we need to also invest in battery storage to account for the fluctuations in energy. So that is where I would go. Thank you for your renewable energy.
You haven't been in Ellensburg when the wind's blowing 50 miles an hour.
Yes, I have.
And all your neighbors' leaves are passing in front of you. Tom Kramer.
You know, the thing is, we talk about building infrastructure, and I remember the pictures when Obama put the stimulus program in action of bridges being built in the country. The arches were imported from China. The Chinese workers were assembling those bridges, okay? So we gotta be careful as Democrats to make sure there is local union labor building that infrastructure. We'll put money into developing the infrastructure we need to process that energy, but it's gonna be produced by local union labor, and those products are not gonna be made in China or any place else if I have anything to do with it. Thank you.
Shannon Hader.
Yeah, so I'm all about safe, healthy, wealthy, and wise communities. And, you know, the wind, the south, the solar, the water, that's part of the wealth of this community. So how do we harness that? Definitely improving grid and battery and things that let us get more out of those resources. But as part of a comprehensive energy plan and a comprehensive system of investment that includes decreasing the incentives for coal, increasing the incentives for green energy and new technology, such that we have the proper investment in the future that builds this wealth to an even greater level. Jobs, new technology, and allowing Kittitas County to be the center of leading our country in that. And I think that's very doable.
Braden Olson.
Yeah, interesting problem that we have, producing more energy than we can use here, and yet we need it so desperately elsewhere. I think you're asking one question, and it's a bunch folded into one. It's infrastructure in general. You know, we're behind the rest of the world in our internet access and broadband. So it needs to be roads, it needs to be the electrical grid, it needs to be that. And when I hear all of that, I think it sounds a lot like the New Deal. And that was the greatest point of economic equality that this country has seen in the last 100 years. And I think that this is our biggest opportunity because of what everyone said here. These are blue collar jobs. These are union jobs. These are labor jobs. This is a chance to infuse that middle class with the wealth that has been taken from it since the 80s. So we double down on that. We're creating jobs. We're building all three of those pieces of infrastructure, not just one. And the last thing I would say is, let's increase the utilization here. You know, create more jobs here. Part of what I was talking about earlier. Let's create more clean energy businesses here that can utilize that energy so we don't have to ship it all back to Canada. Thank you.
Jason Ritterizer.
When America invests in public works projects, and that's we're talking about infrastructure. We're not just investing in the structure that's built, but we're also investing in the communities in which those projects are being produced, and we're investing in the families that are building that infrastructure. These are, without question, living wage jobs that will be created here in the 8th Congressional District. There is no reason that we should not be the leading exporter of renewable energy technologies right here in Washington's 8th Congressional District. That takes leadership. It takes leadership on upgrading and integrating a electrical grid that can handle the energy we're going to produce right here at home. It also takes innovation and creating an environment where the next generation of leaders can go to Washington, D.C. and focus on these problems. Because having too much energy is a good problem to have. We just got to figure out how we integrate that into our system so we can utilize it. And that's what I've been focused on.
Thank you. Before I launch into this one, I just want to let everybody know, This will be the last question we'll do. You guys have done an incredible job. I know that we did not get to a lot of the questions that were asked. So again, I will have time for conversation, individual conversations. If you'd like to move your questions forward that way, grab them, go off in a corner, harangue, whatever you need to do. But we'll do this. So this one actually was an intriguing one. I'm a child of two teachers, public school teachers. So federal initiatives such as Race to the Top gave money, prestige to controversial educational reforms. We currently have a Secretary of the Department of Education that may not necessarily be supportive of those kinds of activities. Please explain your positions on public education accountability and reform. And I think we're starting with Tom.
I have the advantage of being, having been degrees and advanced degrees and fellowships in public education policy. The PISA or PISA study, whoever at Wall Street came and said, well, the American schools are doing terrible. Well, I read that whole study, all 10,000 pages of it, and I analyzed it. The Chinese areas that were doing better were the top educational districts in China compared to every educational district in the United States. And what they did in those districts, they were paying teachers 3 to 4 times what we pay in this country. They were treating them like real professionals. The teachers would have 12 hours of class time a week. The students' programs were individually designed by the teachers. We need to invest in education like that in order to be successful in the world today. The Chinese are doing it, the Japanese are doing it. We have to compete in that world economy, and our children and our grandchildren have to, and we need to treat teachers like professionals that they are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, clearly I have benefited from strong public education opportunities, and that was really because I had dedicated counselors and teachers who wanted to push the envelope on making sure that we at Auburn High School had very innovative programs similar to kids across the United States. And so I think we're in an interesting and very important time for education. First of all, we have to fully fund our basic education programs and also make sure that includes special programs for special needs so that all families have an opportunity to get their kids what they need to be fully educated. Second, I love the idea of how we've tried to infuse measures of accountability so that we can compare and contrast how schools are doing, but it's not working so well. I think the intent is not playing out on how some of these measures and testings of success were intended to happen. We have differences in how schools are measuring things, sort of how to lie with statistics. We're incentivizing cheating sometimes, and so we have enough experience now to look back at the metrics, really search for what we want to achieve, and say, okay, what's the next generation of accountability that can be meaningful and point us in the right direction?
Thank you. Brady Mills?
So this is like a 10-hour topic in 1 minute. So I'm going to piggyback on that and say exactly, and then I'm going to move on to one of the other mini things. So I also come from a family where both my parents were teachers. So I'm just going to be clear right off the bat that if there's an opportunity for me to put more money towards public schools, I'm going to be a yes. Now that said, we actually have a bigger issue going on again. And it's, again, an inequity issue, but we've put more money per student than all but 4 tiny countries, right? We, the taxpayers in this country, we are well funding our education system. The question is, how is it getting distributed? So when and this is very much a rural problem because we have schools that are very well funded. They have more money than they need. And then we have schools that do not have the funding to do the basic resources. Why? Because the way that we fund our system is from property taxes in the area. So schools that are set up in high wealth regions have all the benefits that they need. And schools that are in rural communities or in communities that don't have as high property taxes don't get all the money that they need. So this is absolutely something we need to address because if any of our communities are put at a disadvantage, the entire country is put at a disadvantage, which is why we're falling behind. Thank you.
Thank you. Tracy, what are you
I'm a product of public education. My kindergarten, first and second grade teacher is 4 rows back from the elementary. I am a huge supporter of public education. I think it is the greatest good, the public good that America has. It's also the greatest equalizer. The reality is our public education system isn't perfect. Donald Trump has been appointing heads of agencies who fundamentally disagree with those agencies. That's his goal. We need to stop attacks on our public education system. Part of the way to do that is to send people to Washington, D.C. who will be staunch advocates for our public education system, making sure that teachers actually have the resources they need in order to reach students in their classroom, that they're not spending their own money and then counting on some tax incentive to get the money back. We need to focus on class sizes to make sure that a teacher's not overwhelmed with so many students they're teaching somehow to the bottom. We also need to make sure that students in America understand that college is reachable for everybody and will be affordable for everybody. But if that's not the path you choose, there are paths to living wage jobs. And so we need to focus on job training, apprenticeship programs, technical schools. We could go on and on. But I'm going to fight for public education. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim Schreier.
I'm also the product of public education. In fact, my mom was an elementary school teacher, and all of my education, starting from kindergarten all the way up through medical school, was public. So I treasure our public education system, and I wish that every child in this country, regardless of zip code, could get the education that I got or better. Funding of schools is a real problem. It comes from so many sources. Not a lot of it comes from the federal government, but what does comes with so many strings attached, tests and unfunded mandates. I think that what we really need to recognize is, first of all, the people who really know what our students need are the teachers and the parents and the people in the school. And so having directives come from Washington, D.C. is not appropriate. The money should go as locally as possible. Now, I'm not saying no oversight. I definitely do not want intelligent design being taught in our science classrooms, and I definitely do want climate change taught. But I think we need more local control and definitely no for-profit charter schools or religious charter schools.
Thank you. I think that's good. So let's just take, so have a round of applause for the first.
Experience to this job, working at all levels of government, from inside government and from outside as private sector, to deliver results that change people's lives at scale. You know, from hundreds to thousands to millions of lives affected, to thousands to hundreds of thousands to millions to billions of dollars managed. That is the kind of experience that will let me start day one affecting change for our district. Second, I can beat Dino Rossi. I'm just gonna say, you know, I think he's gonna be pretty formidable. But on just a very, you know, qualitative sense, when you're managing $2.4 billion of budget, even when it's for warm, fuzzy things like saving babies and stopping disease, people are not so nice. So that executive function that comes in from navigating a big budget with high stakes, interacting with stakeholders and other threats, is exactly the kind of wherewithal that's needed to combat Dino Rossi here and win.
You know, I think we all have different strengths and weaknesses that we're gonna bring. I think many of you have heard some of them at this point. So I'm gonna close a little bit differently. And I welcome more discussions on the former, but you know, as I've been going around this district and talked to the blue-collar Democrats and the working-class families and, you know, the union members, I have just frankly stood in complete awe. You know, how strong their hopes and fears are and how much they are like my own family. And the same that we have. And these are voices that, by and large, and I heard some of these comments tonight, feel the Democratic Party has abandoned them. And that we're no longer tied to them except for when we come and ask for their vote. And I believe if given the honor to be the Democratic nominee for this district, I can give a voice to those people again, coming from that background. And also the middle class families who are getting left behind. And last but not least, the young and disengaged people that we need to show up and vote to beat Dino Rossi. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason Miller.
You know, this is going to be one of the most important elections in our country. The control of the House of Representatives is going to run right through this district. And the choice in November is going to be clear. It's going to be between Dino Rossi or Democrat. Now, I was born and raised here. This is not a Seattle suburb district. This is a district that is South King County and East Pierce County and Eastern Washington. And we need somebody that understands this district. Now, I spent my career protecting the community as a criminal prosecutor for King County. And I've spent the second part of my career fighting for working families, standing up to bullies, standing up to big corporations, and standing up to powerful interests that don't play by the rules. And we need, in 2018, an opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. and stand up to a Trump administration that's hell-bent on burning this place down. And I'm running for Congress to stand up for working-class families, to be a voice for the middle class, and to go to work every single day to stand up for what's right. And I'd love to have your support. So thank you so much for being here.
Kim Schreier.
Well, thank you very much for having me here, for giving me a chance to talk with you a little bit, and you could learn a little bit about where I stand on the issues. Our country is at a tipping point right now, and we can either head in the direction we're headed now, with racism and xenophobia, intolerance of immigrants, environmental degradation, and taking this country away from the people and giving it to corporations, or we can all join together and do something about it. And so I am rolling up my sleeves because I am taking this battle on for the patients and the families I take care of, and I am ready to take this to Washington, D.C. Elect me, and I will fight for our families. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Creighton.
All right, I want to say this. I'm a big fan, and my father was a big fan of FDR. FDR, before he got into office, he studied economics for 3 years in this country with the youngest, best economic experts in the country. Same thing I've done for the last few years. Now, we've got to change economic policy. This trickle-down hasn't worked for the last 37 years. We tried it up till the Great Depression. Before that, for 40 years. We tried it back in the 19th century, up until the 1850s. We always went back to classical economics. Federal Reserve policy is determined by Congress. The federal budget policy is determined by Congress. Now, what we do here, this district is a solid middle-class district. The reason why Dave Reichert got elected, because middle-class people identified with him. I hope that you identify with me and vote for me so I can work hard for you to get it done. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So that brings us really to the end of this portion of the forum. Again, we're going to have a meet and greet. I do want to, just a closing. The key word, I think, in all